the map in the original rule did not include environmental justice areas for Coachella Valley. So one of the things we're proposing today is to redefine those environmental justice areas to now include those areas in Coachella Valley, but using the exact same criteria that at the time defined those environmental justice areas in the South Coast Basin. So here's a map of those environmental justice areas both in the basin as well as Coachella Valley. And here's the new environmental justice areas that we're proposing to designate within the Coachella Valley.
Areas in the Coachella Valley that are disproportionately affected by respiratory illnesses due to the poor quality of air that we have. In early January, the AQMD held 2 public meetings to gather input on the implementation of AB 1318, where the community learned about or saw the presentation that was presented by staff. And we took 4 messages from that meeting, and the first one is that given that the Sentinel power plant is located in the Coachella Valley, which is already an unattainment region based on EPA air quality standards, we feel that 100% of the mitigation money needs to be spent in the Coachella Valley. 2, that spending about $40 million, which is the number that's been thrown out there by the media, on a parkway represents an inequitable distribution of funding and raises concerns of whether a sufficient amount of money will remain to address the needs of environmental justice communities in the Coachella Valley. That the poverty data used to designate EJ communities is based on a 2000 census, and we have a more recent census with updated figures, so perhaps those should be reflected. And we also noted that there's a lack of technical capacity prevalent among air quality environmental justice organizations in the Coachella Valley, who at this point would probably need a lot of technical capacity even to engage in an RFP process. So for this reason, the Assembly member feels that rather than reaching an impasse with the community, he would respectfully ask that the AQMD temporarily delays the implementation of the AB 1318 mitigation fund in order to resolve some of these key issues. And he also feels that by delaying the RFP and working with you and other stakeholders, we can build consensus on the expenditure of these funds.
Thank you so much for your testimony.
Yep. Bill, could I just ask a quick question? I did notice on the screen, the language makes reference to our Rule 1309.1 as adopted August 3rd, 2007. And if you look at the package that went with the regulation at that time, we used the 2000 census data and we used the existing air quality data to define environmental justice areas. And so we were concerned that we would be departing from the past methodology. And so as Phil was explaining, if you go back to that staff report, we truncated the map that showed EJ areas. It was just an artifact. And so the community came to us and said, well, wait a second, when you go forward with this funding, your map doesn't show the Coachella Valley. So what we've simply done is recreate exactly what we did before and extended the map to the Coachella Valley. So for consistency's sake with the state law and the reference to the August 2007 version and our previous analysis, we've done exactly the same thing. If we depart from that, then folks can start saying, well, why don't you change the air quality data? Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? And then, in our view, we run counter to what was actually approved by the legislature and signed by the governor. And if I could also just add, this really doesn't, in my view, have to make a big difference. The real issue here, because we've looked at new census data versus old census data, the real issue is I think the area of the city of Desert Hot Springs, and the councilman is going to speak next to that. But if you look at the money, as Phil was describing, 3 pots, one in the vicinity of the plant, and we're proposing the 6 miles. The city that is closest to the plant's located in Desert Hot Springs. So the community of Desert Hot Springs will certainly qualify under anything the board approves for 30% of the money. In addition, 40% of the money is at the complete discretion of the board. So the area of Desert Hot Springs will now qualify for 70% of the money. In addition to that, you have the environmental justice areas that I was just describing. But the Assemblyman is also requesting that all the monies, the number one point that Sylvia was mentioning and is covered in the letter, is that all the money should be spent in the Coachella Valley. So really what the board will be doing at the end of the day is these 3 pots of money are going to be spent in the Coachella Valley. And so there's no reason that the city of Desert Hot Springs would be somehow disadvantaged over what the legislature actually approved, where 40% of the money could be spent anywhere in the basin on anything that was an emission reduction project. And for relative to environmental justice, there's nothing in the bill that restricted environmental justice expenditures to the Coachella Valley. So the proposal that I think will be before you today really is, in my view, going to benefit the valley, and this is kind of a minor nuance in the grand scheme of the overall funding.
If I may add as a
Your
response.
testimony time is over. Thank you very much.
Okay, so maybe the Assemblyman can give
If someone
each
would
one
like
of
to
you.
ask you a question, they can do that. Perhaps the mayor would like to ask you what you were going to say. What were you going to say? There you go. How you like that?
Thank you, Mayor Leverage. So I just want to say that in terms when it comes to the rule that was referenced on the bill, it is our understanding that the rule since has been appealed, so perhaps repealed, I mean. So perhaps if there was some disposition from the board to further explore this concept and to really assess whether it is adequate to implement a rule that for certain reasons has been repealed by AQMD, and that's something that the Assembly member would appreciate. And another thing, when it comes to the distribution of the funds, like we mentioned, I agree with Mr. Wallerstein that the grand scheme of things, it's that all the money stay in the Coachella Valley, but when our local newspapers are already speaking about how this money might or may not be spent and proposing a single project, the community just needs to feel assured that there will be a fair and transparent process, and for these reasons it is that the Assembly member is requesting that there is a delay at least in implementing or issuing the RFP at this point.
If I could maybe clarify something for the board. What Sylvia is referring to is that AB 1318 had a sunset date in it as of January 1 this year. And I think the reason that sunset date was principally put in the legislation was because the bill defined a period in which power plants could call upon the AQMD bank to get offsets. And so by having that sunset date, if you hadn't filed and come through the process, you couldn't come to the AQMD bank. Our staff perspective on this, and I appreciate everything Sylvia is saying, our staff perspective on this is, because the bill is sunset doesn't mean we shouldn't follow the intent and the will of the legislature and governor. If all of a sudden we can say we can change one portion of it because the bill has sunset, then we could say all bets are off and the board's not bound by anything. And we think that that is just going to potentially create problems with various members of the legislature if we don't really follow the intent of the bill. And the only reason that we didn't come to the board sooner on releasing the RFP and allocating the money has been because of the litigation that has gone on surrounding the siting of the Sentinel plant. Since, if I could, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to just respond quickly to the 4 points, because I think the 4 points in the Assemblyman's letter are extremely important. I'm fully expecting that you will hear other witnesses today that will also request that the Coachella Valley receive all the funding since it is the most impacted community. That's just simply a decision that the board's going to have to make. Regarding the second point in the Assemblyman's letter referring to spending $40 million on a parkway request, There has been discussion about the parkway in the Coachella Valley, but there's been discussion about many other types of projects that you'll hear today. There is absolutely no decision that has been made about any funding to any single project. What we're really doing here is we're starting a process where people can put in proposals for projects. Those proposals will be evaluated as we evaluate all RFP proposals. They will ultimately come with a staff recommendation to a board committee. I'm going to recommend to the chairman that it be the administrative committee of the board, and then it would come to the full board for a approval by the full board. So the public will have every opportunity to appear before the committee and also before the governing board before any decisions are made on any project. And at this point, the staff hasn't made a judgment about any particular project. The one key thing is that it must be an emission reduction related project. I've explained this issue about using a different census data, and it again is the reference that is in the legislation to August 3rd, 2007, version of 1309.1. On the technical capacity side, I would make the following comments and offer. First, I want to note that this item was originally supposed to come before the board a month ago, and now we delayed it at the request of the Assemblyman to today. During that period of time, based on comments from the Assemblyman, we changed the number of days that folks would have to respond to the request for proposal from an original draft of 60 days to the 90 days that is currently before you. I've also had a number of discussions with Supervisor Benoit, who has expressed a similar concern about the community airing this issue of technical capability for responding, because that was certainly an issue that we heard in our recent public meetings. And so I want to make it clear today to our board and to the members of the public that are here that the staff will, depending upon what the board approves or doesn't approve, we're prepared to hold workshops. We're prepared to hold office hours in appropriate locations to provide information, assist people, provide them with a checklist, so they should be able to put in proposals. And what we will also do is we can't prejudge or get too involved because we have to review the proposals, but we will help them to understand and discern whether the proposal meets the test of being a true emission reduction project. And I would just say lastly, as an indication of this staff's commitment to have an open, transparent process, I have personally done several meetings in this last month. We did 2 kind of consultation meetings. Then I went out for a 3rd meeting to Mecca, so I had a previous meeting in Mecca. I went out for a 3rd meeting in Mecca to discuss the Cabazon agreement, and then I stayed another hour and a half to answer any questions anyone had on the RFP and the process and so on. So I'm fully expecting that even though I've been to that community now 4 times in the last 12 months, that I will be out there a number of other times over the next few months to help the community understand, prepare itself, and be able to submit proposals. And I can tell you that in our 10,000-mile jurisdiction, I can't think of one other community that I've been to 4 times in the last year. So there is a commitment by the staff. The staff has been with me to work with the community and to move this process along to a good end where the board will get to make decisions on which projects to fund.
Any other board member questions for
Yes.
Ms. Carney?
Why specifically do you want us to delay the RFP? What would you like to see changed in it?
So in some of the meetings that we've held with SCAQMD, the community has felt that that there are changes they would like to make even to the RFP draft, the way some of the language appears in the draft right now. And the community also feels that in terms of the process, they feel that they're not at a point where they can, one, trust the process of the RFP, given the lack of engagement. And the second one is, that I will repeat is the technical assistance, that we do have many nonprofit organizations who are working on environmental justice, but right now they do lack the resources, and we don't have one specific organization, especially in the eastern Coachella Valley, that specifically works on environmental justice. So this is something that they do aside of what their responsibilities already entail. And the final one that the Assembly member wants to stress is the opportunity to build consensus, because we have heard in our office from communities from Desert Hot Springs to North Shore about this lack of transparency, this lack of process, and the Assembly member, just in conversations he's had with Supervisor Benoit, they just want to ensure that the technical capacity is there and that there's a consensus built around the mitigation funding.
I guess the question in my mind is whether it makes sense to do something different with respect to the RFP, or have the RFP go out and then engage in the process that Mr. Wallerstein described, to help community organizations that do not have probably a lot of funding or the technical expertise to actually be able to respond. One thing that we have sometimes done, actually, is provided funds, apart from this RFP process, but provided some funds to environmental justice groups so that they could participate realistically in our processes, because it is very technical, and they probably have to submit some technical analyses that otherwise they couldn't afford. Would we have the possibility of doing that?
I think I would recommend that, and again, recommend that you let the staff do an appropriate amount of assistance, because if we go down that road, then other bidders may argue that they had the advantage of being funded and they didn't, and we issue a lot of RFPs. On this particular instance, we've already done more outreach, more transparency than any other RFP I can think of, because we're still at the pre-release stage. And so, I personally spent time in the community. I understand exactly what the community is saying. I've toured the community and looked at some of the individual projects, areas that they would desire, and I think we will be able to work our way through this process. And at the end of the day, if I'm wrong, the board could reissue an RFP, extend the time period, or decide not going to fund things for now, and so on. But the money's been here a year. When I listen to this community, and when I look at this community, and when I see some of the impacts in the community, my first instinct is, let's do this, let's do it right, and then let's get the projects underway so that we get the benefits to the people that need the benefits.
I do think that we should be intentional about assuring that people in the community, which is a long way from here, know that the board has also listened. And I think that we should either have an admin committee meeting in the Coachella Valley when the responses to the RFP would come before the committee, or we should have the board meeting at which the someplace, usually the committee meeting is better because there's more give and take and there's more opportunity for adjustment actually at the committee level than by the time you get to the full board meeting. But I think we need a meeting in the Coachella Valley, and not just at the Palm Springs end of the Coachella Valley, on the results, what we get in from the RFP, so we are adequately responsive here. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I had other comments.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Supervisor,
go ahead.
Ladies
I'm
first.
sorry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. You mentioned, Board Member Carney asked you to identify some changes. You didn't do that. You mentioned how the community feels, what the newspapers are saying, so on and so forth. I would like to see some identified, tangible changes that be proposed as part of the process as we move forward. I would also like to recommend that in lieu of the fact that we've had the funds already for a while, and that we need to get into a process in order to identify the concerns and define the clear changes that need to be incorporated into the approach, be able to address the 4 points that you made, including the RFP process, that either there is a ability or an inability to address also, and allow us to better assess where we may or may not run into conflicts as a result of our efforts to promote the community's best interest. So this is a very fine line that we walk. There's a responsibility that has to be taken by the community as well as by this board, and I think that it's important that we separate between the feelings and the actual tangible, changeable issues that can be included through communication. Thank you.
Supervisor Gonzalez, I appreciate the recommendation, and there's one thing that does come to mind right now with the language of the RFP, which I mentioned, and in the PowerPoint presentation, it mentioned that an applicant could apply to, or that an applicant could apply to either the EJ or the close proximity, and to mention whether they were applying to both in the application. I know that when I read the draft RFP, there was some confusion about whether they could also apply to the 40% discretionary. On one page it did have that, and on another page it didn't, so that is something that we did bring up, and based on the presentation today, I didn't see that change made that the community could also apply to the 40% discretionary.
Since there's no limitation for the 40%, it's at the complete discretion of our board, any proposal submitted would qualify for the 40%. And if somehow, we thought it was clear, if somehow that's not clear, when we release the RFP, we can make that clarification.
And you can see why it's important to, especially coming to these meetings, to have something outlined point by point, concerns that you have that are then handed in to us, and we can see this and discuss it point by point. It's very different from when you verbalize it, and it can turn into anything. So it also waiting. I'm not saying that you haven't communicated prior to, but it would have been very helpful to have had these concerns submitted so that we could then be ready to address them at this meeting when we're considering the item. It's just, this is something very important, very big, and it demands that preemptory type of attention. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We have a number of other people to testify, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of discussion about this item after the, but if they have any more questions for this young lady, Mayor?
Just 15 seconds. I think Supervisor is going to make a motion to limit the area of the funding to Coachella Valley, and if he does so, I'll be delighted to support that with a second. So, first item on the floor.
Okay, with Stephen Hernandez,
the affluent communities in the Palm Springs area. I'm here to put a face on our community for you. We're doing what we can to make our city better, and recently an investment concern came to our city with a project that they're talking to us about. And the reason I bring that up is because they said something in their comments to me that struck me as odd when I read it this morning. They said, what are the reasons behind why this city, Desert Hot Springs, is much backward than other cities in the area? Desert Hot Springs has an average income of about $25,000. We're not a rich city. Now under construction in our city is the Sentinel power plant. That's bringing much needed jobs, but it's also bringing some impacts to our community. Some of those impacts are going to be naturally some degradation of the air quality. I'm here on behalf of our city councils who support the 6.2 mile or 6 mile radius for the mitigation area, and understand that's in the legislation. I certainly want to thank the AQMD staff and our city council does for the time you've taken to come down to the Coachella Valley and to reach out to us. The mitigation funds, especially in the 6 mile area, have been, as I understand it, set aside to help offset the negative impacts and to make sure that our community isn't off in a worse condition. We definitely have impacts from this power plant. While it's a 6 mile radius, the majority of our population really lives about 2 miles away from this new power plant. The issues on the economic justice areas, environmental justice areas, we understand those fully. I think others are here to speak to that. The message from our city council and on behalf of our residents is, to the extent that that 6 mile radius can stay as it is, that's what our community needs. We're looking to grow, we're looking to improve. We definitely have impacts from this factory, and we don't want to go backwards. The California Energy Commission definitions seem reasonable to us, but I'm sure your staff has a better handle on that. And that's it. Please consider our community. We need the help that's going to come from these mitigation funds to lift our community up and make sure we aren't taking a step backwards. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for taking the time to come and testify. Would Ryan Sinclair come to the vacant microphone?
Good morning, Chairman Berg, Steve Hernandez, and this is Isabella Hernandez, my daughter, who's accompanied me. I am the council member from the city of Coachella. We are the easternmost city of the Coachella Valley. Our demographics, we're a low socioeconomic community composed of 99% Latino, Mexican American, a majority of which is working in the agricultural communities. We are the backbone of the agriculture industry of the state of California. Let me first start off by saying that we wholeheartedly support the notion that these $53 million should be spent within the Coachella Valley. We are going to see the impacts of this power plant. We are going to live them, breathe it, see the facility every single day. And so the fact that there are mitigation dollars, for us, it just lends that they should all be spent within the Coachella. Having said that, we're really here to push for a fair and equitable distribution of those dollars. When you look at the nonprofits within the Eastern Coachella Valley, they lack significant capacity. They're very new. They have no technical executive directors. They have no legal staff that can help and assist them in perhaps answering the technical, practical applications with respect to even an agenda item as today. So with that, we want to make sure that when these RFPs are out and when we're having this meeting in terms of what projects should be awarded, again, that there's fairness and there's equity. It's difficult for a community like Coachella and the nonprofits from Coachella to compete with very sophisticated government agencies that will be applying for these dollars. And that's what we ask, that's what we're here for, to ensure that there is equity in this process. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Would Luis Almeida come to the vacant microphone?
Give him hell.
Okay, my name is Ryan Sinclair. I'm faculty in Loma Linda University School of Public Health, Department of Environmental Health. I have a couple of things I want to present to the board. First of all, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak, and also thank you for organizing the funding, the $53 million, to be some of it, and hopefully all of it, to be spent in the Coachella Valley. That represents a great improvement in air quality for the Coachella Valley, and that's a very good thing and good news. Another thing is that I'd like to thank the members of the AQMD who have come down to the Coachella Valley over the last month. This is it's a big effort, and some of the meetings I know have gone into the night, and it's taken a lot of time and driving. So that's something that we really appreciate. Actually, I'm living in Loma Linda. I was I went to elementary school in Desert Hot Springs, and I grew up in the desert. But I wanted to present a couple of things. The first thing is that I had been involved in helping some members of the Eastern Coachella Valley and some in a formal process to figure out what the priorities are of environmental justice in terms of air quality for these different groups out there. And I've used some public health methods, some environmental justice methods to bring people together in a fair and equitable process to figure out what these different projects are. I have a report, but of course I'm still working on the report. I've got the 3 workshops in, I've got a list of participants and all of those things, but what I'd like to present the most is that really it boils down to 2 things, and one is that most of the community out there feel that there's not enough time to organize, just as Mr. Hernandez has just stated. There are environmental justice groups, and they do have concerns, but their concerns are very much in an unrefined state. Going through this priority ranking process, we were able to kind of whittle down and kind of get some of the more feasible solutions out. But still, there's a major concern that the time is very soon. So if this means extending the RFP due date, or if it means revisiting the RFP into some of the language about that, that's those are things up to the board, really. The other issue is in terms of equity. I for one would like to advocate that the $53 million all of it gets spent in the Coachella Valley. And then in terms of the report that I have, I'm working on it to try to make it available, and I hope that this can be part of the fair and equitable process that the board is speaking of and the AQMD is speaking of. And if there's any possibility that I could be included in any of your additional assessments that you want to do to help people organize, let me know on that, because so far I've organized this workshop that we've had already. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you very much for your testimony.
Mr. Chairman, down here, I thank you for submitting your letter and telling us about your efforts to try to identify the priorities of the community. I have a question for staff on this issue. On the evaluation criteria for the points in the RFP, there's a possibility of gaining 5 points for community support and government support letters. It really just should be community and government support. I mean, if there's research as opposed to letters, right? I mean, we would want to take that into consideration.
Staff would have no objection to deleting the words.
So when we get to passing this, I'd like to make sure that gets into that.
No problem.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
could I ask a
I'm sorry.
question of Mr. Sequist? Your letter asks for modifications to the existing RFP. Do you have specific ones?
There was some mention in a few of the workshops that we had we had a total of 3 workshops. The last workshop, one of the modifications suggested, and that's something brought up by people attending the workshop. I'm trying to keep an unbiased perspective on this, but the modification was that the term professionals who have the significant experience in I'm not sure where this is listed in the RFP, but I know I've read through this once at least. and are the ones who have to submit the proposal. And that's one of the things that would be modified. The other one, of course, is let's see. Is pretty much the time period involved. So if there was a little bit more time to get organized and get the groups together out there, that would be highly appreciated.
If I could respond on the first thing that he pointed out, and this is something that is in basically all of our RFPs, that if you view the funding going to a contractor, you want to make sure the contractor has the capability of carrying out the project, that you don't provide money and then the money doesn't provide the good that it was intended to because they just simply don't have the capability. So that's just a standard thing we would do in the allocation of any public funds given our fiduciary responsibilities.
But does it refer to professionals?
It says experience and expertise of proposer.
Okay, counts for 30 of the points.
How about some language or other evidence of capacity to carry out?
That would be great.
I have a comment on that. I think that, of course, the contractors or the people who are building the infrastructure projects are going to be professionals or the experienced. The terminology currently in there is worried the environmental justice community that are basically just community-based organizations. They don't feel like they have that.
So can I ask, Mr. Chairman, is it okay to ask staff how they define these two terms in here? And it's worth 30 points. There's in the evaluation criteria, experience and expertise. And Dr. Wallerstein and I served for countless years on environmental justice groups and advisory committees together. And he, I know, is sensitive to this issue, but there is experience and expertise in applying for and qualifying for grants and proposals, and there's experience and expertise in environmental justice issues. So how is staff, proposing to define those terms in the context of these awards?
Yeah. So first, again, let me say that I think Mrs. Carney's suggestion is a good one. But what we would expect a community group to do is to team up in the proposal with an entity that had the expertise. If they wanted to see that the monies went to paving, let's say, and they had specific locations that they thought should be paved, then they should submit a proposal that indicates, a reputable company that would do the paving so that we could have some cost information about exactly what we're getting for what amount of money. And these are the sorts of things that I think we will be able to help them with once the RFP is issued and we do some work with the community.
And we'd be willing to help everyone equally.
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you.
I share Dr. Luder's concern, but I think that Supervisor Gonzalez articulated the issue very accurately when she said, that we need to have specifics. We can, look at them then and evaluate them then and besides them. And I don't know, since I've been here, any RFP that wasn't sensitized to environmental justice. Now, I may have a biased perspective, and sometimes, you can't win, because when I go to my community, they say, well, why doesn't all the money come to the black community? I said, because, we're not the whole community. When I go to the brown community, they say, well, how come all the money doesn't come to the brown community? I say, hey, man, because the black community deserves at least 10%. So, as long as I'm a member of this board, I'm going to be sensitive to that. And I think, Dr. Lou, Dr. Larstein goes out of his way to respond to this. And I think I think that's one of the reasons he got this job. So, I was really interested in the testimony from the assembly person's administrative assistant. But I'm more persuaded by Supervisor Gonzalez. I think this thing needs to get out. But we need to find a way to maintain the sensitivity that everybody knows that needs to be in this thing. Everybody up here knows we need, and I don't think there's a person up here that I know of who's not sensitive to it. We're all sensitive in our different ways because we all have different backgrounds. And we have a few more people to testify because, when the guy talks about the low income of the city, in America, a median income of $25,000, that's pretty low. But when I was a kid, it wasn't a power plant. We lived near a slaughterhouse and rendering plant. And nobody cared about air quality. You couldn't find an air quality expert in the United States of America in those days. But I can tell you at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, when that rendering plant was running full bore, your nose told you that there was something not right in the area. So I don't know, I have health issues now that doctors can't figure out. I gotta believe that in some part, that's from my childhood. So I know what they're talking about. And I know that the money needs to be spent there. So the idea here, from my perspective, is everybody is on the same page. It's just, that they've got a few different words in the process that are different. I didn't mean to wax philosophical because we have 2 more people to testify. And thank you very much for your testimony.
Mr. Chair, can I ask one question?
Yes, sure.
Jay, do you want to go first?
Thank you. Just to follow up on Mr. Sequist's other point about the timeline. As I quickly looked at this request for proposals again, I don't actually see in here the latitude to delay making awards for some piece of the money. I would think that would be, in this circumstance, something we would want to clearly have, so that we could accept proposals for some portion of the money and extend the time to respond on some other portion of the money. Just as latitude in this process. Is that here someplace and I'm just not finding it?
Well, what I wouldn't have quite said it that way, Mrs. Carney. What I would say is that we have to come back to the committee and the board, and if the committee and or the board is not satisfied, you can say we're not going to spend all the money this time. We're going to put some money aside and go back out for another RFP. So that's implicitly an option in the process, from my view.
Even though it doesn't state that.
Well, we're not going to, so I don't want everyone in the room to panic. Suppose you got a group of really lousy projects. We're not going to recommend you
then
spend.
we wouldn't take any. Okay,
Right.
and I understand not taking any and going out again. My question really is, can we take some?
Sure, it's the board's discretion once you look at the projects as to how much money you want to spend.
Well, maybe I'm wrong, but it might give some community groups in the valley more comfort if that were in here.
And my question was similar to Mr. Sinclair. Rather than postpone this another month, I'd like to move forward. But if you, and I know community groups, because I'm an organizer too, you know, if you say 3 months is enough, but you know, people can make some meetings, something comes up. Did you want, with 100, following Jay, maybe 120 days, where this, you know,
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman?
If I could,
I've been waiting to weigh in.
Yeah, I've
Give
been
everybody a
waiting for
chance.
you.
But if I could, on this issue, the Assemblyman and I spoke 2 nights ago, and while we disagree, he would like to see it delayed. I proposed that I would amend to go to 120 days. That would be double the normal time frame. And while he accepted that would be a much improvement, he still would, I would have to say, in fairness, he'd like to see it delayed. But I'm going to propose as part of my motion that we go to 120 days and further quantify how much assistance is going to be available during that 120 days.
And I don't know if there's any language in there to have an assessment period of that 120 days. I mean, you can release the RFP.
Sir, your testimony is over.
Okay.
And this is not a conversation, so what I'm going to have to do is call Mr. Jesse Valdez to the vacant microphone.
Members of the governing board, and Mr. Chairman, thank you for this opportunity. My name is Luis Olmedo, and I'm Executive Director of Comité Cívico del Valle, community-based organization working also on environmental justice within the Salton Sea Air Basin. And I submitted a letter, but I'll just go over a few points. But I also just want to make clear that I think some of the things that have been coming up, is such as Parkway, I think that was just touched upon. And one of the things that's just such a sensitive issue, and before I make my comments, and I want to thank the Executive Director Wallerstein for being true to his commitments, being available to the community. But I also want to mention that the 2 hearings that happened in both Desert Hot Springs and Mecca, they begin with a 30-minute presentation on a bike path. And so I think the communities had to hit the floor running. The first I've heard that this process was moving forward late November. And since then, I think they've been in a catch-up mode, especially in the environmental justice community. So with that, I'm just going to read a few things that we think that should be looked at into the RFP. And but first of all, the Coachella Valley is located downwind of the Sentinel Power Plant, located within the Salton Sea Air Basin. Environmental justice communities in the air basin have been plagued 4 decades with persistent PM10 non-attainment. Recent advocacy efforts have surfaced inadequate housing conditions, contaminated sources of water, unregulated hazardous waste dumps, such as Western Environmental, Lost and Dump, Mount San Diego, and Lost and Dump, which is continually burning 24 hours a day, and not to mention these exposed sediment from the Salton Sea. Some of the things that we wanted to point out is in putting together the environmental justice map, there's 3 factors that were utilized in Rule 1309.1. One of those factors is poverty at 10%. We obviously have concerns. The fact is outdated data, but we must stick to the legislation, and so be it. The other factor is PM10 exposure. PM10 exposure for no greater than 46. And so we agree with that. I think it's an area of non-attainment for particular matter. The third component in 1309.1 in the 2007 rule, which is air toxic exposure and the cancer risk greater than 1,001, is a study that was done that excluded the Coachella Valley. And so it's called the Multiple Air Toxic Study Makes 2. So we're trying to be true to the legislation. I mean, it seems like there's been some discretion into how it's implemented. And if we're at a point where there's discretion being made, but it begs for more discretion, and we want to support. I just want to finalize with asking that we recommend that the South Coast Board postpone any decision on this matter and move further request the assemblyman to submit a cleanup language that will be more prescriptive and in the responsive appropriation of these funds, responsible appropriation of these funds. In addition, the RFP does not reflect priorities of environmental justice communities. And I want to be respectful of the time. I just want to thank you for paying attention. I'm very pleased with some of the comments that are being made. I'm very sympathetic of this community. I've been living most of my life in Imperial County, and I thought conditions were bad there. It's deplorable in the eastern Coachella Valley, and I hope that you're sympathetic with them as well.
Thank you very much for your testimony. It was very good. Thomas, is it Keck? I'm sorry. Kirk. And Jesse, you can start your testimony. State your name for the record.
Good morning. My name is Jesse Valadez. I'm here with my wife. We're from North Shore. I don't know if you're familiar with North Shore. We're right next to the Salton Sea. And we're here for some, we have a few issues, that we'd like to bring up to you, so your attention. One of them, the buses, our kids are bused to school. And about the funding, we're going to need that funding for that, for the school buses. And another concern would be the running, the washouts we have from our roads. We have flooding out there, and it just our roads are gone after any rainfall, bad storms we have out there. And another thing would be another issue on there's a state park, which is closing. But mostly it's the school buses that brought us here, for the kids, and the roads washing out. And one concern it would be on the buses would be us having to drive the kids 15 miles. Both of us work. That'd be a hardship on us. And other things is like there's the smell from the Salton Sea. You currently know that it's receding, and in the future it's just going to get worse because the IID, Imperial Irrigation District, it's going to stop, I think, in which would be about 2 more years, adding water to the Salton Sea, and that's going to be an issue there. And those are just issues, and I wanted to bring up to your attention, and I hope we get some funding for our buses, and you keep us in mind in the future for any funding of the North Shore, my city, my wife's city. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony.
Members don't, but you might know somebody that works for me. I do want to point out Aurora Wilson, the director of our air quality program at CVAG. I thought you might. And just know that Aurora continues on with the legacy of the late Roy Wilson and does a fantastic job for us at CVAG. So thank you, Aurora. With respect to this issue, I do want to acknowledge that Barry has bent over backwards to come out to our neck of the woods. His staff has been fantastic, and some might think the process is starting now. I think this process in many ways started in Supervisor Benoit's office 6 or 8 months ago, when he invited community groups and cities and other representatives into his office to alert them of this opportunity and start discussions on how funding could be used. I am not here to discuss a project, projects, competing projects. I think that's what the RFP process is all about. There's going to be a technical, transparent, extremely technical evaluation done by SCAQMD staff. I've got an incredible amount of confidence in Barry and his staff and their ability to rank proposals and give you a staff recommendation. So again, I'm not here to discuss individual projects, and I think there'll be another time and place for that. With respect to a proposal, you can imagine I run something called CVAG, Coachella Valley Association of Governments. I, like every other speaker here, has said we think 100% of the funds ought to be used in the Coachella Valley. I suspect that Supervisor Benoit and perhaps others of you will be eloquent on that point as well. There's a reason those windmills are pointed in the direction that they are, and there's a reason that we are a separate air basin. And I think for technical, political, and economic reasons, all mitigation dollars should remain in the air basin that is most impacted by this power plant. The I know there's been a lot of discussion about concerns out there about the RFP process. Again, I'm supportive of the process. I think you've done a nice job in terms of outreach already. I actually share the concerns of the, I share the concerns of the Assemblymen and others that say there is not the institutional capacity out there to respond to this RFP. Nor is there when the state of California releases an RFP. Nor is there when the city of Riverside releases an RFP. And frankly, it is not a fair world out there. There are organizations with capacity, and there are organizations that don't have capacity. You have a fiduciary requirement to make sure all $53 million is spent effectively and efficiently. So I do support many of the requirements, in fact all of the requirements in the RFP, and I know some might look at my organization as a sophisticated one that will do a fine job in putting together a proposal. Trust me, Aurora and I are going to need a lot of help from your office, much like many nonprofit groups. Putting together a proposal to the Air District is a challenge, but there's a reason it is. You're trying to reduce emissions, and it's a complicated issue. My last comment is on whether to delay this process. I don't, and this is a personal opinion, not a professional one from CVAG, I don't support delaying the process. And the last speaker mentioned the Salton Sea. And that actually gave me a bit of a twitch. Some of you may know that I ran the Salton Sea Authority for 7 years. And for 7 years, there was and by the way, I fixed the Salton Sea, so it's a done deal now. But for 7 years, I heard the refrain, we can't do anything until we have more data. More air quality data, more monitoring data, more technical data. We have enough data. We have enough data to move this process forward. And representing CVAG, I'll tell you the data that I'm most concerned about. That's the existing air quality in the Coachella Valley. That's the jobs information in the Coachella Valley. And that's the public health in the Coachella Valley. And I don't want to study this more. I want this money to be put to good use and reduce emissions in the Coachella Valley. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for your testimony. You know, I just had a thought listening to it. If, when you talk about the lack of technical expertise by community groups in the U.S.,
it would seem to me, all the way from the Coachella Valley, to be here today. This is a very important item that's before us. I want to talk first of all about the number one concern that was shared by everybody and the need to spend this money in the vicinity of the Coachella Valley. I think we need to do that both to show compliance with AB 1318 and also recognize that of the approximately 16,000 megawatts of generating capacity within the South Coast Air Quality Management District, 50% of that is more than 40 years old. In addition, water quality board requirements will dramatically impact once-through cooling generators in our very near future. The older plants are inefficient and result in much more traditional and greenhouse gas pollutants than new quick-start turbines of the type that we approved with this process. To reach the state's renewable energy goals and modernize and replace the old plants as necessary to maintain the backup capability we have to have, we're going to have to site additional power plants like this one. It's inevitable. Do as best we can in all the renewables, it's still inevitable. If we site those and require mitigation for the impacts and then transfer those mitigation funds to someplace other than where the plant is sited, the message is not going to be real good when you go to the next community that you want to site a power plant in. There's not much doubt. I mean, you've driven to Palm Springs, and I assume everybody here, when you go down that path, you are going to a different air quality basin. And the problems we have come in, we don't send them back. We try to turn those fans on facing the other direction, but it just doesn't work. So the impacts are going to be on the Coachella Valley, and I believe that that's a solid argument that for the amendment I'm going to propose to the RFQ or RFP. Matter of fact, I'd like to quickly review those. We have before us 3 recommendations from the staff. Regarding action 1 concerning designation of environmental justice areas for the Coachella Valley, the staff recommendation is fine. The small discrepancies that might have been discussed, I think, are very, very minute. We comply with the statute by the recommendation. Regarding action number 2 concerning the definition of close proximity to electric generating facilities, I might have personally like to see that a little larger, but the data suggests and is defensible that we use the 6-mile radius around the plant for that 30% piece. Regarding action number 3 concerning the release of proposals to solicit emissions reduction projects under AB 1318 mitigation funds, I would move the staff recommendations with 2 modifications. First, I would like to see that the staff, that we recognize that the money should be spent in the Coachella Valley, the area being implemented by the project. And the second one, as I mentioned earlier, is that we circulate this for 120 days. I don't believe any of these groups can really get started until they have the actual approved RFP in their hand. And that's when they'll start thinking, do we have the resources? Where can we find the resources? We got to get that out. But give them double the standard time to reply to this proposal. At the meeting in Desert Hot Springs and again in Mecca, I indicated that we are ready today to accept phone calls from community groups to get on a list, that we're going to set up appointments for AQMD staff to use my office space in the desert or other space that's available to come personally meet with anyone who needs technical assistance. This is in addition to the holding of the basic bidders conference that will be held to start the process. And I have assurances from Mr. Wallerstein that I have asked him to make, and he's been more than willing to make, that we will have as much staff time as there is demand for people who'd like to sit down with the technical staff to assist in the preparation. It's recognized this is not an easy process. You can't make it easy and still be good fiduciary watchers of the people's money. So we got to make sure that we give the help they need, anybody needs, to comply with the requirements, and that's where we will focus a lot of attention. I share the Assemblyman's concerns there, and we will work with the Assemblyman's office to schedule those proposals. A couple other quick comments. The first witness talked about the breadth of the map, and I think there's a little confusion. The environmental justice area does go all the way to the Imperial County line. There was an original published copy that looked like it's cut off. That's the end of the air quality district. And it is very broad and wide at that end. It covers all the agricultural area of the eastern Coachella Valley that was mentioned earlier. So rest assured that area is in the defined environmental justice proposal that is in front of you for the environmental justice area. One thing I would like to quickly mention is that early on in this process, we did meet. I asked for a lot of folks to tell us, what do you think the scope of these proposals should be? And one that came up was a pathway. There's been a lot of discussion about a pathway that takes advantage of our geography out there and a wash that runs through the valley. But I want to reassure everybody, that is not a done deal. That is not even a finalized proposal, or it hasn't begun. We're waiting for the RFP, excuse me, I said it again. And it will be judged alongside everybody else's suggestions. And there's a long list in the request for proposals of possible suggestions, and it also says, or any other idea that helps reduce air problems in the valley. So it's wide open. It starts today with our approval. Put this out on the street. Let everybody bring in their competitive proposals, and then through policy committee and then back again at the board, we will have the opportunity to evaluate and judge and decide which of these proposals merit support from this board. So with that, I would make the following motion. That we approve the designation of the environmental justice areas for the Coachella Valley.
Senator?
Yes, sir?
You know you can't talk. I know you're supervisor now, but you were a secretary. You know you can't talk about it and make the motion.
Okay.
So what I'm going to do is recognize Supervisor Gonzalez, who's going to say that your comments were effective. Then I'm going to come back to you so you can make the motion. Okay, now, you got it.
Thank you, Supervisor Gonzalez. I would move that we approve the designated EJ area pursuant to the August 2007 version of Rule 1309.1, priority reserve as set forth on page 2 of the board letter. Secondly, I would move that we approve the definition of close proximity to the electrical generating facility as a 6-mile radius. And thirdly, that we modify and release RFP 2012-17 to solicit emission reduction projects solely from the Coachella Valley to be implemented under AB 1318 Mitigation Fund and circulated for a 120-day proposal period. The Coachella Valley is defined as the area that is both within the jurisdiction of the district and the Salton Sea Air Basin for the purposes of this proposal.
Second motion.
Mr. Chairman, could the staff ask for a clarification about the motion?
Yes.
Just so the staff is clear.
Okay.
There were a couple of other things mentioned, Supervisor, during the meeting relative to the evaluation points. And Mrs. Carney asked that experience and expertise of the proposer be expanded to say, or other evidence of capacity to complete project. And then the other one was the last item on the points. Dr. Liu asked that we drop the word letters, so it would just be community/government support.
And I would incorporate those into my motion.
Second. We have a number of board members who would like to speak to this motion. You're first on the list. Is you up or down?
I agree with this motion. I'll be happy to support it, and I don't have further comments now.
Okay. From the other end of the rostrum, Dr. Liu.
Yeah, I actually had a couple questions for staff that I didn't get into at the beginning. So you mentioned that there was a report that was required by AB 1318. Do you have any idea of the status? Because when I see the chair of the Air Resources Board, I always ask her about it, and she never knows. Do you have any idea when they're actually going to do it? It was due, what, a year ago, July?
Yes, that's correct. At this point, we don't have any further
She's just not telling you.
That's what it is? She knows what she's not telling me? Well, excuse me, can you say?
Yes, it's overdue, and we don't know when it'll be produced.
Well, it would be helpful to know that. In the list of projects, I think one of our people who testified said something about ag projects and issues, and also I had noticed that gross polluting vehicle projects weren't on there. Those type of projects would also potentially qualify, right?
Absolutely. There's one criteria really in that regard, and that is that it produces an emission reduction. We just simply gave a list, and we were very careful every time we've shown that slide or talked to folks to say we just wanted to illustrate some types.
Those are
of
examples.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. On the letter that we received from the Assembly Member Perez, he mentioned that he didn't believe there was a consensus around the priority air quality issues. Certainly, that's something that we could talk with the community about and potential bidders on, trying to identify what criteria we use for making those decisions and what we know about the air quality problems in the area, right?
That's absolutely correct.
Okay, I would encourage you to do that. And I appreciate Ms. Carney's proposal that we have either the administrative committee meeting or our decision-making meeting in the community, so that there is an enhanced ability for the community to participate in the decision-making process. I think that one last thing. I'm confident, but I want to make sure staff agrees with me. We are not going to have a problem identifying enough projects in there to spend the entire 100% of this money in the Coachella Valley, right? I mean, there's plenty of opportunities in the valley to spend that money to reduce air pollution.
We would be very surprised if we didn't have adequate projects, but again, if that resulted, then the board could either reissue an RFP or decide to spend the money elsewhere.
We have no reason not to focus the mitigation efforts in the area, as close to the area that is impacted from this project as we can.
That is correct, and I think the most sensitive part of the money is the part that must, if this is approved, be spent within 6 miles of the plant.
Right.
So that's the one place where we got to make sure we get adequate.
I know it's been a much more painful process than you anticipated or hoped for, but I think we're pretty close here, and I hope that the 120 days will suffice for the assembly member and the community members. I think that the direction of the board's pretty clear here, that they would like to support Supervisor Benoit's motion on this. I have you and I talked about this last night, that when we have our retreat in April out in Palm Desert, I would like to go out to Mecca and see the community and learn more about it, because my experience as an environmental justice advocate and as an environmental advocate has shown that there's really nothing quite like being there and seeing it. So I encourage any of the other governing board members who would like to join me to take advantage of the local knowledge and those who are willing to show us around in April when we're out in the area. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm in support of the motion that Supervisor Benoit has made, as well as the amendment suggested by Ms. Carney. I noticed in the letter from the environmental justice groups, the last paragraph requests that there is an advisory panel that includes members of your community that reviews the projects, and that would be in an attempt to reach consensus about how the money is spent. I would not want to mandate that, but I would certainly want to encourage that, and with the help of Supervisor Benoit, perhaps that could be arranged, that the groups come together and talk about how the funds could be expended, because certain amounts must go to certain causes, and you might meet ahead of time and work out kind of a plan on how we divide up, the funds that are available. It could help to reduce acrimony in the community, and also help to have your community understand what is required under the law and what is permissive under the law. So I encourage you all to do that, to work together to find a way to spend the monies. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Mayor Yates?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know that Riverside has offered their facilities for the AQMD folks to utilize for helping out with these RFPs. But I think Assemblyman Perez ought to make his facilities available. I don't know where your field office is. What city is it in?
India.
It's in India. And for the council members that were here, from Desert Hot Springs and the cities of Mecca and Coachella, I think that the city council has some responsibility to hold hands with the AQMD on this issue. You folks from the city councils ought to hold hands with these EJ groups, because I know you can lend assistance to them, because I know you know where to go for people with expertise in writing or answering RFPs. So I would highly suggest that you hold hands with the EJ people as well as the AQMD staff. The gentleman that was referring to the problem with the buses out at Salton Sea, I would refer you to our staff, because we have every year several dollars from the Moyer program and what have you to fund those buses being converted to, or buy new buses, CNG for that area out there. What is the school district out at Salton Sea? Does anybody know the name of it?
Coachella Unified School District.
Oh, but they haven't applied for the conversion?
No, actually, they've been very complimentary. They have received funding from us. So, again, we're waiting to get into the RFP process, and then we will appropriately work with them. And if for any reason we had a good proposal from them that wasn't funded through this mechanism, then we would look for one of our other funding.
Well, that was my point, rather than, because we do have money available for the conversion to CNG buses, other resources. And that would open up other areas for the dollars to be spent on the mitigation of the effects of the generating station. That's why I brought it up, rather than allocate for buses, that we do have resources that can accomplish that. And I am in support of the ex-Senator, present Supervisor's motion, and I would call for a vote.
Okay. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? The board is empty. We have a motion. We have a second. Is there, on something this big, I think we ought to take a roll. Oh, wait. Open the roll. Yeah, it's not open yet, right? Is it on? It's not lit up. Hey, you know Mike is over here ragging me. You know, so, is it on? No. No. Call the roll. Call the roll. Okay. Close the roll. 11 yeses, no nos. This motion passes unanimously. Okay, moving to item 20.